sofa if that's all right. So come and join me. Now you can smell some pizza. We are the barrier to pizza with this talk, so it's always the tricky situation, but we'll do our best to go through it.
I feel like I should apologise as well for anyone that came that was expecting to hear from Ed Daly, who's my business partner, who's the studio director at TCR, who's travelling, and I sort of spoke to him yesterday and went, "Are you going to be really, really knackered?" And he went, "Yeah." I was like, "Should want me to do it?" So I sort of stepped in as a favour, but it means you don't get Ed, so I apologise for that up front.
Well, if we weren't recording, I'd call it an upgrade. But we are, so I better not. So anyway, thank you for stepping in then and helping out. And I suppose probably the first question that I've got is a little bit more pertinent to you rather than Ed anyway. Tell us a bit about the origin story of the Chinese room.
I used to kind of go, we had quite an unconventional start, but I've been in the industry 15 years now and still definitely imposter syndrome to the hilt. But actually I'm not sure it was less that it was unconventional, more than I'm not sure actually how many conventional studio kind of origin stories there actually are when you kind of talk to people. So we started off, I was a lecturer, really, really struggling with imposter syndrome, so I've been brought on to do from working in the arts into working in a creative technologies department at the University of Portsmouth, and I'd kind of ended up somehow teaching 3D Studio Max and Photoshop, which actually meant I was about a week ahead of most of the students because I'm really not technical. And I was starting to go, I'm not good, I can't teach this stuff, I'm not good enough, and the students are better than this. What I am quite good at is like research and kind of ideas and stuff like that. So I managed to, I was doing a PhD on first-person shooters, which was basically around, at that point there was a lot of discussion about whether story and gameplay were antagonistic, and I was like, I think story's just a gameplay mechanic, you should look at it the way you look at physics or AI or anything else, it's just a unit that helps players have an experience. So I was doing that, and I kind of thought, well, there's a lot of theory floating around about games, and kind of actually what tends to happen is that there's a lot of academic theory around games, and every time someone publishes a paper, like a game pops up or 3 games pop up which completely disprove it, and it felt like it'd be more interesting to take some of those questions and just try making stuff and see what happens. So we managed to get some money from Research Council and made a few Half-Life 2 mods, and one of them was Dear Esther, and people seemed to like it. And then Rob Briscoe, who's a Mirror's Edge artist, asked us if he could recut the visuals on it, and we're working with Jessica Curry, who did the music, and a great actor, and a bunch of sort of like people that would come in and out, another developer called Adam Griffiths, who I worked with for a long time. And we sort of recut it as a commercial game on the basis that Rob's work and Jess's work and Nigel, the actor's work, was so good, it kind of felt like it would be nice if they got paid properly. So we figured if we could just sell like maybe a couple of 100 units, we could at least bung them some cash for the work they'd done. And without really any sort of expectations, it kind of went out on Steam and it blew up, and it did really, really, really well. And suddenly we were sort of a game studio. So we sort of went from that. We got contacted by Frictional Games, who asked us to make a short follow-up to Amnesia, which turned into A Machine for Pigs. And then around that time, we ended up in LA sort of unexpectedly and met the Sony Santa Monica people who went, "Oh, I should pitch us a game." We were like, all right, then fair enough. Did that. Then suddenly we had to employ people. Suddenly we were making a game for Sony. And so it was a bit like there was, I don't know if anyone remembers it, people are old enough, a few years ago there was a banned Xbox ad where it started off in a delivery room and a mum's giving birth and the baby comes flying out about 600 miles an hour, goes into the sky screaming with a controller, just doing this, shoots through the air and then ages as they go and ends up in a grave at the very, very end of the advert. And like it was like nuked in about 48 hours, it was off British TV, but it's a brilliant advert. And it kind of, that felt like the experience of TCR for a long time, was just flying through the air screaming, learning how to be a games company along the way. And we did that for a little while, and we did pretty well. And then about 2017-18, we kind of hit like bumps in the road. And around the same time, it seemed to be a lot of small studios, we were about 15 people at that point, seemed to be in a similar sort of position where it was a lot harder to secure stuff. The stuff we'd been doing, people weren't so interested in, publishers weren't so up for funding, so we ended up in a really sort of going through a horrible patch where we had to lay people off, which was horrendous. And we started talking to Sumo around that time, and they were sort of like, cautiously growing as they sort of have been. And they were like, well, look, would be kind of interested in would you be interested in rebooting the studio as part of the Sumo family? And I met with Carl Cavers and Paul Porter and really liked them. Really, really liked their attitude, like especially having been through that process of having to lay people off. Sumo are really, really very strong ethos on being staff first. And we were like, okay, that could work, that'd be interesting. So they sort of put me together, got me talking to Ed Daly, who's like been in the Brighton scene for a long time. We sort of ran Zoe mode amongst other things, and we kind of went, yeah, all right then, let's kind of give it a go. And it's we joined Sumo in 2018, and basically initially it was like me, Ed, a guy called Nick Slavin, who's the tech director at Stainless, John McCormack, who knows everybody in the games industry, so probably half the people in here are going, oh yeah, John, yeah. As art director, and we're now we're 85 full-time staff, 120 project staff, working on a couple of titles simultaneously, and it's been a, yeah, I still kind of feel a little bit like I'm flying through the air, kind of going.
You're flying through my questions. This is
yeah. I also I get really nervous because I talk too much. I start going like this sort of thing.
Well, stop talking for a second.
Yeah, good.
Let's pause. I'm really intrigued about the sort of the impact that Sumo has had on your studio. Because I must admit, when I saw that there were deals being done, in my own mind, I'm sitting there thinking, are these compatible with each other? Are the ideologies and is there enough there to make it work? I probably think about most deals like that. But what impact has it had on the team beyond you've got some funding now to grow the team and that kind of stuff? How's it shaped out? How's it worked?
Well, I mean, there wasn't a team when we joined Sumo. It was literally just me.
Right.
And Jess, my other half, who wrote the music for most of our games, and we co-ran the studio together for a long time, kind of had said, I want out at this point. I don't really want to be directly running a company anymore. And I didn't want to be running a company, and I think I was increasingly aware that I wasn't actually very good at it. So it would be good to work with someone who was good at it and could do all that sort of stuff. And the gig was, I really want to make games. I don't want to do that side of things. So if we can find a partnership where that will work, that kind of works for me. And I think, like I say, Sumo's attitude towards their people, and I've known sort of over the years quite a few people that had worked for Sumo, had very, very good experiences. It felt like going, well, we're joining a company that cares about the teams that make the games. And I think that was a big driver in it, that it didn't feel like there would be a major kind of cultural shift, because their values were pretty similar to the values that I held, in terms of making games is really, really hard. So it's not just the games you make, it's how you make them that's important. So that kind of didn't feel enormously challenging. I think the biggest challenge probably for me has been going from running a company of 15 people to working on much larger teams. And I've never, because of the way I came into the industry, I've never worked for another studio. I have no idea about that stuff. It's only sort of through people that I know who've worked for other studios that I've sort of learned how other studios work. So I've sort of never been in that position of kind of going, well, it could be this or this or this or this. It's all second-hand information in a way for me.
It must have been a culture change when you walk through the office and there's someone there who works for the company that you don't know.
Well, it's really weird. The other day I walked in and there was someone, I knew who they were because I'd seen their photo. And there's definitely a few people now that I have to go, what's your name again? Because I haven't worked with you directly. And that is really weird. That really still freaks me out quite a lot. But someone came in and our chance was like, all right, hey, finding it, is everything good and this sort of stuff? And they went, yeah, it's really, really great. And they went, have you been working for the company long? And I was like, yeah, quite a long time. How do I say this? Because I don't want to really embarrass them at the same time. They're like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, well, I kind of run the company. And there was this awful kind of pause, and I was like, I don't want you to feel awkward about it. But also, it was really good because I kind of went, and I walked away and I thought, that's a really brilliant ego check, actually, because I'm not the company anymore. There's lots of people, and if I don't want to be in a situation where I overplay my hand in terms of the importance to it, because actually there's a very large number of people who are making these products and these games, and they're very self-sufficient. There's a huge amount of talent in there, a lot of brilliant people, and actually that's the studio. So you might be a studio leader, but that's only one part of the studio, and you have responsibilities to that team, but it's really the whole team which makes the culture, makes the studio, makes the game. So I think it's probably good as someone in a leadership position to kind of have your ego in check like that.
I like the fact that this video, which I couldn't get to run, the only voice I hear at the start is yours.
Yeah, we had a real conversation about that. I was a bit sort of like, I'm not sure, but they're like, no, we just want to put it in. But I was like, I don't know. I kind of weirdly, I think probably like a lot of people in my position, I've got quite a sort of a sporadic, like strobe light ego, where my ego can be really, really, really big in places, and then it's completely non-existent in others. And like half the time I'm like, yeah, I'm really happy doing all this stuff, and then the other half the time I'm just like, can I just sit in a cupboard and not talk to anybody and just have like notes passed underneath the door.
Well, let's talk about ego for a second, if that's all right. I mean, when I came across you many, many years ago, you kept winning awards. You're always on stage collecting trophies, being nominated for stuff. How did that feel for a studio that was still, you say shot out of a... I'm not
weird?
Yeah, I mean, how does that make you feel, and is there a pressure to continually be up there achieving and winning?
No, I don't think so. I want the team to, but you also kind of learn that players really count, and I think, like, don't get me wrong, it was lovely, it was amazing, it was very, very flattering. I think there was then a big reality check, because then we kind of went through that way, but then we also went through a patch when people didn't want to work with us, and they were like, well, that was great, but what you're doing now we're not interested in, and we wanted to change and do other things, and no one really wanted to do that. So it's quite it's lovely, but it's not the same as long-term sustainable kind of being able to do what you want and things like that and work with the people you want. So it is important to kind of keep it in check. And it was very sort of like, at that point, we came out of nowhere. We hadn't really been in the industry. People were asking us questions like, how should you make games, this sort of stuff. And we're like, well, we kind of, and you're sort of making this stuff up and you're on the spot. And we didn't have any media training or stuff. So, stuff's coming out of your mouth. And then there was sort of, people who've been in the industry for 20 years go, what do you know about it? We're like, well, not very much, but we're sort of in this weird spotlight. But it was part of, I think around that time, it was that real indie bubble when Steam was still fairly young. And studios and individuals were really sort of like, it felt like coming out of nowhere. And a lot of people did have actually long roots in the industry. But there was a lot of scope. And that's, I think we said a lot of the time, and I still really believe it. It's like, you kind of go, well, these little companies came out of nowhere. I'm like, we didn't come out of nowhere. We did. But we also, Steam got behind the game, Valve got behind the game and put it on the front page. And if they hadn't have done that, I wouldn't be sitting here, it would have vanished without trace. So you kind of have to be sort of aware of the fact that you're part of this sort of wider ecosystem. And we happened to hit a zeitgeist. I'm really proud of what we did, and I think what we did was really good. But we also were in the right place at the right time. And like years ago when I was an academic, I got commissioned to write a book about Doom, which was my all-time favourite games. And they actually sent me over to the States to talk to Ed, and I still don't know quite how, I ended up in a room with John Carmack, and I was like there just completely starstruck, and I was like, but where, what do you see about Doom's impact? And he wasn't having any of it, and he just went, someone was going to make Doom, we happened to make Doom, someone was going to make Doom, it was just us. And I think there's quite a lot more to it than that, but I think it is a really fair point as well of going, people converge. And you can sort of feel it. And at that point, there was a convergence around the time Esther came out of lots of people going, what if we turned the dial a little bit more on story? That feels underexplored. It feels like we could go into that space. We just happened to launch into it with, I think, something that was pretty good. So,
well, I'll throw another thing at you. It helps having a talented group of individuals. I mean, the people that you mentioned there are all brilliant. That's quite difficult today, to identify that talent and to secure the talent. Your studio is growing quickly. What's the talent like at the moment that you're looking to bring in? Is it ready to work in a business like yours?
Yeah, I mean, particularly with, I think particularly there's a lot of young talent out there, really, really good people coming into the industry. I think one of the challenges, and again, this is just purely from my perspective, I've no idea if this is sort of more widely applicable. One of the challenges is about experience. And one of the things that we sort of like talk with some of our young developers about is about the pace at which you can expect to develop your careers and experience, because we see there's a lot of mobility and a lot of people going from studio to studio, and because they're going from studio to studio, they're sort of climbing up each time. And if you do that pretty fast, you can get yourself into a position of like being senior without ever having seen a game through from start to finish, which is fine and it's great, and that sort of ambition should be supported. The problem is what happens if you're in a position of responsibility and the roof caves in on your team, and suddenly you're in a position where you're going, well, I haven't actually been through this before. So I think understanding that notion of pace of career development against the time it takes to make games, and it's the old, is it Donald Rumsfeld, the known knowns and the unknown unknowns and that sort of stuff. And I'm still like, 15 years, I mean, I've made 6 games in 15 years. I haven't made a AAA game. We're sort of like, building up in terms of our capacity. So there's a lot I don't know. If you put me down in a AAA game in sort of the last quarter of it and said, how do you solve these problems? I wouldn't have a clue. I'll be really reliant on the people around me. I think one of the things that we do see is, I think what's been really, really interesting about like the brilliant talks that we've just had is that idea of going, studio culture is really, really important. And I think there are still a lot of challenges, a lot of stuff we're grappling with, but that focus on studio culture and the expectations, particularly from younger developers, of that there should be a good studio culture. There shouldn't be any bullying. There shouldn't be any kind of discrimination against people, those sort of things. It's just expected now by that generation. And I think that's can only be a good thing. And I think it will make better games as a result, but it's constant work. You don't get it. It's not something you can take for granted, and you kind of have to start from a position, I believe, that as a studio, you will always be failing. You will never be exactly where you need to be, and you've just got to constantly sort of nurture that. But that comes from the people. But I think, I don't think there's any issue with talent. I think it's making sure that the people who are relatively early in their careers, who have a lot of promise, are actually being nurtured and supported through the kind of difficult second, third album period where more is expected of you in terms of responsibilities, and to make sure they are actually adequately supported as they learn those responsibilities and not being catapulted 2 steps ahead of where they ought to be and then put in a position where burnout happens a lot more because people are being asked to do things that they've not really been supported to learn to do.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, yeah. Oh, that's insightful. I mean, and I've heard you do a talk before about crunch and overdoing it and the sort of the nature of that. You've got to balance that, I guess, with working for the big studio where there's big demands. So let's get to the what's happening next at the Chinese Room. Obviously, you can't share confidential stuff with us, but
no, I mean
we're recording as well. So
like Mission Impossible lawyers kind of come down.
Well, I don't know. Are there Mission Impossible lawyers? At
there's always Mission Impossible lawyers at every part of the game industry. I mean we're working on a couple of unannounced projects at the moment. I think the thing which is really, really interesting and fascinating and the learning curve for me is kind of more formal project management and sort of really understanding how important data is in that. I think it was really important, the sort of comments about how you do stuff like when you were talking about Dax, about sort of saying how do you make sure you are flexible and you are responding to people's needs as people outside the workplace and everything else. As sort of you're in a large studio and you're going, but we have to sort of maintain communication and documentation, and if people sort of like there's any sort of drift in terms of an understanding of what people are aiming for, then that can cause a lot of stresses and tensions and things like that. And that, I think, my respect for good producers, good project managers is on a steady, like unbroken over 15 years upward trajectory of going, it's like if any business, actually the heart of business is not the people who run the business, it's the administrators. And that sort of stuff, that practical on the ground, do people have what they need to be able to do their jobs properly, is, I think, so phenomenally important. So as we've grown, I think, it's just put another gear in my respect of sort of like good project management, good producers who can actually go, how do we, I think way of putting it. I suppose, like a lot of creative media, games are incredibly hungry. They'll just eat and eat and eat and eat, and they'll eat whatever you throw at them. And I think there is that sort of notion of people sort of like passion running unchecked, of people going, but I want to work until 3 a.m. because I'm really excited by it. And you know that actually that's a really bad thing in about 3 weeks' time. But they want to do it, and you want to allow people to have that sort of drive, but in a way that you know isn't going to take them over the edge of a cliff in a little bit. So you almost have to find a way of protecting the team against the game. And I don't think that's about sort of saying we make an enemy of publishers or financiers or investors or whatever else in those demands. The game will always swell, no matter what sort of like the framework around it is. People will want to make it as good as they can and to get better and better, and it's always going to have that tendency to sort of expand and to get ever more hungry. So you have to have those systems in place that protect the team from the thing they're making. And I think that sort of, you kind of read anything about sort of like artists going back through sort of like history, and that sort of like being consumed with your own creative practice it's a pretty common established psychological thing. We shouldn't feel like we're any different in terms of what we do. So I think that challenge is always there, and for me, that's your responsibility as whether you're a team leader, a studio leader, a line manager. That is your responsibility to your people, and that's the single most important thing about your role, is you have a responsibility to people to basically go, I've got to get them from here to here intact and happy, and we've got to produce this thing along the way. But I think seeing them as sort of like sacrificial sort of grit to that mill, is no one comes out of that happy. You don't come out of that happy as a manager, I think, unless you are someone who has no human qualities.
Well, some people are known to be like that. So a couple of projects in the works. We look forward to seeing some stuff on that. I'm quite interested in just bringing this back to sort of the location in Brighton. I'm always fascinated by that. I don't know whether you were travelling to Portsmouth and back, and whether you voluntarily chose to come to Brighton at that point, but what's it like working in Brighton in a games company?
I'm from Brighton, so I'm just completely biased. It's the best city in the world anyway. So I think as a games company, I think there are challenges about Brighton. Brighton's really expensive, particularly housing. And I think, again, particularly for sort of earlier career developers, that's really, really challenging. How do you support that? How do you sort of like not basically have people priced out of it? On the other side, there's an amazing scene here. There's loads and loads of people. There's loads of great companies. So there's that sort of mobility around where actually it's a good place to be a developer. And it just has that, I don't know, I mean, for me, so like I moved to Brighton when I was about 3 and kind of grew up in Brighton, and then went away and lived around a bunch of places. And then we came back here, I can't even remember when now, just before Esther came out, a few months before Esther came out. And I mean, for me, the city's just really inspiring. I love it. I'm sort of really, really happy here anyway. I think it's nice to know you're part of a development community. I think we were a small studio for a long time, and again, I think because I'm quite socially awkward, which is a really unusual thing for the games industry, I've heard. So we weren't ever massively outgoing as a studio. We were quite insular. We didn't really know anyone. We were sort of like scattered sort of things, and it feels nice to actually be in a larger studio now. I'm forced to interact with people on a daily basis. And I do feel part of a community of developers in a way that I don't think we necessarily did when we were smaller. So, yeah, I think I mean, I'll sing Brighton's praises all day long, really.
We did email each other before this evening. We should have checked attire, shouldn't we? I mean, I've got a picture of you in a check shirt. Is this all you wear? No, I don't need to know that. That's
pretty
fine.
much. I did once go to when I think first time I went to GDC, and I was supposed to be meeting this journalist for some interview. And I was up like this top of the I forgot what it's called, the Moscone Centre, where everyone was hanging out. And this guy was texting me, and he was like, "So I'm just looking for you in the top thing. Like what do you like?" And I was like, "I'm middle-aged, white, bald, glasses, wearing a plaid shirt." And he just texted back, "Look around, mate." I was like,
oh my word! Well, what we did talk about in the text is Brighton and Hove Albion, which is one of our joint passions. I don't know if there are any football fans here. Sorry if you're not, but we're not going to go down the football chat, and it's a terrible thing to do so. But can we learn anything from De Zerbi, the Brighton manager? Do you think? Just
yeah, I think he believes in his people, and he has that thing of going. His expectations. I think a really good manager has expectations, but their expectations are what they see in the individual, and they know is there. So it's not I expect you to be here because I need you to be here. It's like I expect you to be here because I believe that with our support you can be here. Right. And we want you to be the best person you can. And I think that relates to stuff like happiness, that's, and those things like success. But it's about seeing that. And I think, that's what I think why it's been so successful. And like for people who aren't football fans, like our previous manager whipped off to Chelsea with like the entire backroom training staff. And the club just went, that's fine. And they kept going because they realised it wasn't about a few individuals don't make the club. It's right down through to the people that clean the dressing room. That's your club. It's all the fans on the terrace. That's your club. And I think there is a metaphor in that of going sort of like, partially it is a bit of everyone's replaceable, including you, and like holding that in check of going it. But that's part of understanding that, there is a community of people making something, and it's the community that make it. And so your role is to nurture that community and to sort of like see the individuals within it, but also understand that it is a community that needs to be sort of like respected and treated as such.
Lovely. I'm not going to write down where we'll replace. Well, I'm going to write down be part of a community. That
Be
feels
part of a
good.
community, not sell Trossard, he's not worth it.
Are there any questions for Dan from the floor? Well, listen, don't take that as a bad thing. I think
No, it's
this
either
is
gone
hungry.
very well or very badly.
They're
That's the
hungry
thing.
and they're thirsty, and I'm going to bring it to a close there. And thank you very much for giving up your time to come and talk to me. So I just wanted to give Dan.